my favorite line was, "What triggers you teaches you if you're willing to learn. We win the immediate conversational battle only to lose the relational war in a race to the bottom."
Welcome to the Recap Book Chat. We are a mother and daughter duo
Conversing about books over a cup of joe.
seeking truth to help us glow.
Ready, set, let's grow.
Welcome to the Recap Book Chat. Thank you so much for stopping by today. We are diving in to the next chapter, chapter 4 of The Next Conversation by
Jefferson Fisher. And I'm just learning a lot. Let me just say, you're never too old to learn something new, a new strategy. I can just say it's amazing.
Chapter 4, Control Yourself. I really like this chapter. And he starts by breaking it down into two phases of argument. That there's an ignition phase and a cooling phase. And so what are your thoughts on that?
Well, through the whole book, he's saying if you recognize this in yourself, you can also recognize it in others, which I thought that was, priceless, actually. And yeah, you can, if you saw the ignition phase, it could be if you were aware of that, you could thwart it, where, thereby avoid the total blow up,
But what normally happens is he goes through a whole scenario of a family, but someone starts getting agitated, another person gets agitated, they're kind of throwing darts, and it just gets hotter and hotter. It really ignites. And he goes through the whole process of what's actually going on at kind of the cellular level, where once everything's ignited, you are no longer yourself.
And you
Because
can't
that
think.
part of your brain, has been shut down. So you're in the fight or flight, you're in all of that mode. So you're not really, and you're not talking to the other real person, essentially. And I thought that was a great point, that you have to cool back down before you can actually talk to the other person and before they can actually talk to you. And I thought when a voice goes up, you know that they're in their ignition phase and that they feel threatened. So I thought that's cool, because we've all experienced that. And our voice has gone up when you're trying to prove a point, you feel threatened in some way, you've been triggered, your voice goes up, you get a little bit louder. And now that we're aware of that, you can think, there's been a trigger. I want to start the cooling phase as quick as possible so I can talk to the real person.
And for cooling, you're right. Ignition was fight or flight, and cooling is rest and digest, which sounds so much better, really. So, the ignition phase, that might sound okay, but when you go to fight or flight, you're like, oh, yeah, that's not good. And it says ignition happens when, with enough friction, the productive becomes destructive. So maybe you were having that next conversation, but in this little scenario here with John and Grace, the parents arguing about when to put little Lily to bed, he actually says something that was very cruel, and he even acknowledged that he went too far. And then, of course, Grace says something that's too cruel, and where he goes on to say that we win the immediate conversational battle only to lose the relational war in a race to the bottom.
Because you're not in your right mind, essentially. Because you've been triggered. And he goes through the triggers, that there's physical triggers and there's psychological triggers.
Which I thought was so interesting.
Very interesting. And
that part where you do cross the line, because he even has a little diagram in the book. Ignition is like this: I'm so done with this. You're such an idiot. And then there's a line there, like picture a mountain. And then here's a cooling thing: I shouldn't have said that. What I meant to say was this. You hear the difference in the meaning behind that. So I just think, like you said, when you're in an ignition, then it's like your brain is just shutting off. In fact, they teach us this for school. School needs to be a safe environment, because your prefrontal cortex does not even work if you don't feel safe. I mean, you can't think.
You can't learn. Yeah. How are we supposed to be creative if you don't feel safe? That's your survival mode has been triggered at that point.
Yeah, and that's what you're going and so he even says the same thing like we talked about last week, to ask someone what your triggers are. If you don't know your triggers, to ask someone, what are my triggers? And I do think we need to realize a little friction offers room for improvement, but we don't want to, if I might have to have a hard conversation with you. And then that's why I love Brant Hansen, who, by the way, has another book on being unoffendable. I think it's
I
called
saw that.
Living Unoffendable or something. And he has little pictures that he's drawn in there. And that's what this one is about. I saw him promoting that and it was so funny. But it goes with this chapter, actually. I don't know that we would ignite, there would be no ignition phase if both of the people were not offended. If you didn't let yourself get offended. But physical triggers are the easiest, like you've already hit on one, like raising your voice, or maybe stepping too close to you, like getting in your personal space, maybe pointing a finger at you, or someone grabbing your arm or something. Those are physical and direct. And it said that he acted like that you can see these, so you don't have to be Einstein to figure these out. But the psychological triggers, that's a little different. And they even are broken down to social evaluation triggers and personal identity threats. And then that goes into 4 more.
And then loss triggers.
So we got a lot to social evaluation triggers, though, can be boiled down to the idea that you care about what others think of you, which we all have a deeply rooted need to be liked and desired. So that goes with that one, social evaluation. And I was reading Atomic Habits, and he said we're herd. We are herd. We are people, like the Bible calls us sheep. We long to be in community, and we'll sacrifice almost anything to be with other people. So
we were created for community.
Yes.
So
but that was the social evaluation trigger. So the next one, personal identity threats. There's the competence triggers. And number 2, the autonomy triggers. Number 3, purpose triggers. And number 4, value triggers. And I thought that was interesting that he broke these down. Like competence is that performance lens. Like, what if I fail? What does it mean? Does it mean I'm not capable? What if I'm not correct? And in the workplace, or even little kids, if they can't make a mistake, we just have to be willing to embrace failure better in our society, And the autonomy triggers is like you feel like you're not trusted, like you don't have any say in your decisions. I know that as a teacher, that can really be like your time. They're like, eat up your time, and I feel like that would be that way with nurses. You want to spend a little bit more time with the patient, and maybe they say, you have 5 minutes, get in and get out, so you don't have autonomy.
Or even with kids, because, they feel probably controlled, and that kids want autonomy. They're trying to break free, essentially, of childhood. And so I think we could see this a lot in kids too, that struggle.
And the number 3 was purpose triggers, was a sense of meaning behind their work. And I know that's true in kids if you teach them why this is important. If you just say, we're going to learn this math and, like area, we're going to learn area, and you don't connect it with anything in the real world. But if you say, this will help you paint a house, put carpet down, or all this kind of, then they're going like, oh, pay attention, connect the learning. And then the last one is value triggers. And that's like your beliefs are being disvalued. And that is happening now. I mean, I have a friend and she's having to go through all this training. Teachers have to watch these videos. I mean, you've got to use pronouns. You got to do that. That's your value is being, not honored. Like, I don't want to use the wrong pronoun. I just want to call people what it is, But so that would be a value trigger. So I learned so much just because he breaks it down. And I like that. He gave this example, and I thought this explains so much. Let's say you hear someone criticize your favorite political candidate. you also feel challenged, even though the criticism is not aimed at you, because you've tied your identity to that candidate or party. Whoa. So if you feel it and you're going to ignition phase right then, that means your identity is tied to that. So what do you think about that?
He also said the mama comment. He said, I can say something about my mama, but if you say something about my mama, then we're gonna have issues because she's part of your identity. She's part of, and I thought that was an interesting, because that's a true concept too. But I do think this, again, we could go back with Jamie Winship with the identity. I don't feel like this will be as big of a trigger if your identity is in Christ. If you are getting your true identity from the source, from our maker, I feel like these won't be as big of issues. You know what I'm saying?
And then you mentioned loss triggers, and the psychological threat of loss can make you defensive. And I thought this was overcautious. I would expect that, but it said perhaps it causes you to over-explain, hesitate to voice your opinions, avoid difficult conversations altogether. So, and I think that would be huge too.
And we think of loss as like losing a person, but he said it is that, but it could also be loss of a job, loss of status, just loss of anything really.
Or the fear of losing. Maybe you hadn't even lost it, but you just have this uncontrollable fear.
And it causes separation. He said that was kind of the theme of that.
So, and then he said, recognizing your body's ups and downs in the face of conflict gives you a huge advantage. And do you see that? He calls it discernment. He said, some people call it emotional intelligence, but that when you see somebody raise their shoulders or clench their mouth, or when you be aware of those things, and then you can understand that it's information to gather. It's not something for you to throw right back in their face. You're just saying, oh, I understand, and then to me, that just is so kind, and you can give grace instead of, I want a slap of the face. You give grace.
Yeah. My favorite quote that goes with that is, if you want to put out their fire, find their trigger. So I like that because you're being curious. You're not being offended. And when they're throwing something at you, you're like, I wonder what triggered that. And you find the trigger, you know how to cool it down and get them back to where you can actually have a good conversation. And he also said, what triggers you teaches you if you are willing to learn.
That was my favorite.
Yeah, if we can learn our own triggers and look at all these triggers and realize and it's hard in the moment. I don't think I've done it yet in the moment, but I'm still learning all these. I can look at past arguments and be like, oh, I was triggered here. My husband was triggered here. But in the moment, if we can realize that, then we can have a conversation instead of an argument.
And I think it's hardest in the moment, though, because, when you're in the ignition phase, then your prefrontal cortex is shutting down. So you're not going to be able to step back and say, I'm in the ignition phase. You don't do that. You just say, he's a jerk. I mean, that's what you say. You're like, but when we learn to understand ourselves, then it helps us to understand the other person.
100%.
You can see this in literature as well. You're like, okay, so, and you kind of know what's going to make someone upset. That was the beauty of Theo of Golden, is he could not be triggered. I mean, here comes someone, he's going to bestow a gift, and the guy jerks it out of his hand and stomps on it. I mean, and I'm like, what in the world? And most people would have stopped bestowing gifts after that, but he didn't. He was just he said, well, I'm not going to let one bad bestowal stop, And in the other book I read for the book club Canadian, it was The Last Saddle Tramp. And at one place, she's on horseback, and the police told her to take she has 2 horses, to take them across this little bridge, and they told them where they could be for the night. Well, she's doing what the policeman told her to do, but there's these young people, which I would just call them thugs, And they said, "Where are you going? You can't go over here." And, and they're trying to rough her up. They're trying to hit the horse, hit the dog. They're trying to do all this. And she doesn't press charges. And she has a good statement. She said, they did try to bother me, but I'm not even going to try to understand why, because I don't understand myself a lot of the time.
But that's a lot of grace. That's a grace-filled statement.
Yeah. And I was like, whoa. I mean, because it was a night. I mean, I'm sure she felt threatened and, but she was kind of almost unoffendable. I mean, she was not very, which is good. I mean, her and Brant Hansen would have been best buds for sure, because I think we do, but when you give grace to something, you're actually, maybe they learn something. Right? Because she never got excited either. She wasn't afraid. And they were trying to bully her. But you can't bully someone unless they get afraid. They need to be afraid of you. Fear has to be in there.
Well, she hadn't even read this chapter. Chapter 4, control yourself. She did it.
Yeah.
She controlled herself. She didn't let anything trigger her. So, I mean, way to go.
But I know, fight or flight, we hear a lot about that. But I don't think I hear enough about rest and digest, because we need to know what's the opposite of fight or flight. So we can work on the rest and digest. And, I think when we stop and slow things down a little bit, which I love his little scenario, and he goes and tells you what they're thinking behind, their statements. And often, I mean, you always, I don't know how many times, but you say hurt people hurt people. So, if someone hurts you with a comment, then you're just going to lash back. And where does that get us? We're both wounded. Years ago, when I was in high school, we had this, which I had a big crush on him, Sergeant Jim Thomas of the state police. He came and talked to us and he said, okay, if you meet a car and their lights are on bright, everybody has a tendency to put their lights on bright. Don't do that, because then both of you can't see. You just go ahead and pass him and keep your eye on that white line on the edge of the road. And then, but don't bright light him. And I have done that. I have not. When I heard that, I was 16. So that would be amazing that I have remembered something 50 years ago. I mean, don't you think?
Yeah.
Why do you think because I had a crush on him?
Probably.
Yeah, I was
so that's the secret, huh? You gotta have good-looking police officers talk to these schools.
Yeah, I just thought, wow, because he explained it. I'm a questioner though too, and he also said, "You girls don't be sitting close to the boys." And I never would sit right by my boyfriend. He said they need to be thinking about the road, not about you. And I was like, okay. I even had one that had a cushion there. Why don't you sit here? I was like, no, Sergeant Jim Thomas. I'm like, well, he was A+ for sure. But I think this is cool.
Last thoughts to wrap up chapter 4?
Well, controlling ourselves is something we all are seeking to do. I mean, it's one of the fruit of the Spirit. I think it is challenging. I think we should just admit that it is a struggle to control ourselves. And let's not try to control someone else, but let's be able to read the signs. It's kind of like the C.S. Lewis book, The Screwtape Letters. Read the playbook of the other side. And Jefferson Fisher's done that for us. He's given us what's going on in their mind. And I just think that's a big plus. So I would say, don't beat yourself up if you don't execute this correctly. We're going to have to put systems in place. But man, did he give us something to ruminate on. And will we get it right the first time? No. I can tell you that I read the book and still had an argument. So, but it was better. I think it was more productive. What about you?
I love that you said that. And I think, yes, that is huge. Instead of shame, because we know we're going to mess up at some point with anything, not just this, but self-compassion is huge. You have to be self-compassionate. Do not shame yourself. Self-compassion. Hey, I messed up. It's okay. I'll get it next time. Like that's growth fuel. And that's what we want to do is grow. So the thing that that really stuck out to me too, a big takeaway is that nothing productive comes in the ignition phase. Like, as far as solving the problem. So if there is an issue, being in the ignition phase won't actually solve this issue. I feel like we're more motivated to, let's stay in the cooling phase. Let's keep it.
I love that.
Because then we can solve the problem. I like to solve problems. I want the problem solved. So that's motivational for me to think that way. Like, okay, if we're both triggered, nothing's getting solved. So
I love that. Well,
yeah.
Well said. Well said. I didn't really know that much about the cooling phase, so
we stay in the ignition phase.
Yeah,
so
fight or
there
flight.
is a cooling phase out there. That is good to know. Yes.
Well, in these summer days, that would be nice to know about the cooling. Rest and digest.
Yeah.
But my favorite line was, what triggers you teaches you if you're willing to learn. So for my one word summary on this chapter, which I know you would think we would go with control, but I went with willing. I want to be willing, because Jesus says, those who have ears to hear, let them hear. And to me, with one word, you could say willing. I want to be willing to see those triggers in myself, and then I can address them and then help others. So my word is willing.
I like.
What about you?
Curiosity. Because I think, or it could be curious, but curious, because we have to be curious about what is triggering them. What is, I feel like to be productive, we have to have some curiosity. Okay, where is that coming from? Otherwise, we think the worst of them. Like, oh, they did that to hurt me. They're just trying to hurt me. And maybe that's a surface level, but there's something deeper. Like, why are they really saying that? Like he said, they feel threatened. What made them feel threatened? Well, you have to be curious to get there.
What is it? What did he say? Was that in one of the first 3 chapters? We have something to learn, not something to prove. So that kind of goes with that. I was thinking of like Emma M. Lyon at the very first book of that. She's very sad because she lost someone near and dear to her. And then she always is lighting a candle in her window because it's her dad's birthday or whatnot. And if you were to meet her and you think she's melancholy, some people would think, well, what did I do? What did I do? Because we do think about ourselves, but it's a sadness that she's dealing with. She's lost someone that is dear to her. And that could be true even like if someone cuts you off in traffic or something like that. They may be having one of those days. And that's why it's just good to say, what can I learn? And step back and stay in the rest and digest. And even I still think you could probably thwart an ignition, just like someone licks their finger and snuffs out a candle. You could do that and not ignite.
Yeah. I love it.
How many times have you seen one of those movies where somebody lights the dynamite and it's going and then someone steps on the fuse? Step on the fuse. Step on it.
That's like Tintin, that fight scene. It gets lit and relit a lot of times.
Yeah. So we want to be the people that put it out. That's what we want.
I love that picture. Yeah. Let's put out. We don't want dynamite. We don't need an explosion. I want you, what is some homework? Give us some homework from this lesson. What is one thing?
Well, like you had hit on was, and I do think that we want to be teachable. And you said, if you want to put out the fire, find the trigger. So let's see if we notice some triggers, even in a book that you're reading about the main character, like what were the triggers? Remember that book we read, March, when Marmee found out that Mr. March, there was another woman and everything. Man, jealousy. Woo, that was a trigger. And there was a different side of Marmee that was in the Little Women. I was like, whoa, who's this? But not that I don't disagree. I'm probably with Marmee on that. But that would have been all the time.
Yeah, a psychological trigger. And it says your thoughts in the present moment or a perceived future. So, and she probably had both of those going on
at the same time, and just, if you think about, and I do think that will help you give people grace when you say, oh yeah, I bet, this is her mom's birthday and she lost her mom to cancer 4 years ago. I bet this is a rough day for her.
That'd be a loss trigger.
Yeah. And you're figuring that out instead of saying, Where do you get off doing that? We have something to learn, not something to prove. The Bible even talks about lose your cloak, lose this, give them everything. I mean, that's what Jesus did. If someone slaps you on the cheek, you're supposed to turn the other cheek. That would be unoffendable. I mean, you just have to be, rather to take a hit and then still try to gather. I want to be an information gatherer. So let's try to gather information and see if we can be enlightened. What about you?
That's
You think
good. So try that and follow Jefferson Fisher.
So try that. Yes. Let's do it.
I think you nailed it. And that is a wrap on Chapter 4 of The Next Conversation by Jefferson Fisher.
And we thank you so much for growing with us as we get into this journey of becoming better communicators. And we're just thankful that you're along with us as we grow together. That growth mindset, and that's what we need to do. And let's connect
to reflect.
We'll catch you on the next one.